I need props. So, good afternoon. I have three questions and a little bit of talk about some of the scary stuff in journalism because when we talk about diversity, I feel like I'm the spinach at the end of a meal of desserts. But when we look at the issue of race and coverage of race, the social justice issues that we've been talking about for the last 24 hours, three simple questions can get you through a lot of the toughness of that. And let me just go through the three of them pretty quickly. Number one, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? What do you fear about the topic? Are you afraid that you're going to come across as an authority, as somebody who is more knowledgeable about this subject than you are? Are you afraid that someone will accuse you of being a bigot? Are you afraid that someone will say something to you in the course of a conversation, in the course of an interview, that will cause you to have to react? Right? Do you have fears on the subject of race? I think we all do. Our challenge really isn't to come in fearlessly, to come in somehow miraculously having overcome those fears. Our challenge in reporting on race is to recognize that the fear is there in the first place. Because here's the thing with race. Our fears stop us from doing our jobs. Our fears cause us to pull the punch in the interview. Our fears cause us to pull the punch in the headline or in the story. And most often, we are reacting without ever having confronted the fact that the fear exists at all. Now, I don't have a magic bullet for solving the matter of race and fear, but what I can tell you is this. Understanding that it exists, and it exists for you, and it exists for the people you are talking to. Understanding that it exists and that it is always there is the first big step here. And the second is to give it a name. I think like a lot of things in the work of journalism, and particularly in the work of interviewing, turning the problem into a part of the solution, turning the problem into a part of the work becomes one of the best tools. So that if I'm afraid that we are going to get into a subject that is difficult for me or difficult for you as the subject, I am going to begin my conversation with you with that. I am going to say to you, listen, I'm about to talk about something very difficult, and I'm worried that in the course of this conversation, I will say something that will cause you to judge me. I would like for you to give me the benefit of the doubt before we get started. And if you will do that, then in return, as we talk, I will promise you that before I judge you about anything, I will ask you a question. I will give you the benefit of the doubt long enough to learn more. And we will go on. That's number one. What are you afraid of? Second question, what do you mean? I believe that is the single best question in journalism. I also believe that often in covering issues of race and difference, it is the least employed question in journalism. We are often guilty of hearing that someone has said something and either being afraid to ask them what they mean because when we do, they will recognize that they've done something wrong and will try to pull it back and there went my story. Or we don't ask the question because we are absolutely certain of what the person meant and therefore why bother? But I'm going to give you just a couple of reasons why you should ask the question. First, let me give you a quick example of that. Several years back, a council member in Melbourne, Florida, Pat Poole, in discussing what was by then a nearly decades-long effort to rename one street in the town after Martin Luther King Jr. And Pat Poole, for most of that time, had resisted it. In an interview with a reporter, said this about the possibility of renaming the street. The one thing it says to a lot of people is it's a bad section to go to because it's usually in a section that's all black. And the reporter pressed a little bit more, and she said, I wonder about Martin Luther King, if he really accomplished things, or if he just stirred people up and caused a lot of riots. What do you mean, council member, by what you said? One more quick example, and then I'm going to tie these together. This is George Allen running for the Senate in Virginia a few years back. He is being followed by a campaign worker from the opponent, Jim Webb. And that young man, who is South Asian, has a camera and he is recording everything that George Allen says. And he turns to this young man and says, this fellow here, over here with the yellow shirt, Makaka, or whatever his name is, he's with my opponent. He's following us around everywhere, and it's just great. We're going all over to places all over Virginia, and he's having it on film, and it's great to have you here, and you show it to your opponent because he's never been there and probably never will come. Let's give a welcome to Makaka here. Welcome to America and the real world of Virginia. What do you mean, Senator? Well, in the case of Pat Poole, as we pressed further, as the journalists pressed further in that conversation, we learned that she meant exactly what she was saying. Why should we give them everything they want, is what she said as she went further in that conversation. And in the case of George Allen, when asked to explain what he said, what he meant, he said, well, I'm not really sure what it means, but our campaign workers, they call this guy Mohawk, and it kind of sounds a little like Mohawk. Well, Makaka is an old slur for South Asians. It is a reference to monkey. It is one of the oldest and broadest applied racist slurs in racism. In both cases, the person was given the opportunity to either explain or dig the hole deeper, and they chose the latter. But here's the thing. Here's why you ask the question. Because somewhere in Melbourne, Florida, is someone who is thinking, well, if they rename the street after Martin Luther King Jr., the property values will fall. That, of course, came up in this conversation. And one person says that and means, well, that means that just because that section has black people, the property values fall. And somebody else who is doing real estate calculus is thinking that the white people in the neighborhood are going to now start running and selling their properties for less than they're worth, and my property will be worth less. Which one of those people are we talking about when someone says this? Because they're not the same person. Your job as a journalist is to ask the question so I know the difference between that person and me, or I know that I'm exactly like them. It is a responsibility to the person who said it to give them an opportunity to be fully understood. And if you are afraid on the subject of race, you won't ask that question, and we won't learn the fuller truth. Final question. When do you identify? Well, this is a big one. I'm going to do in 2 minutes what I can't do in 90. But I'm going to say it this way. When we are trying to explain how people look, and we identify them by their race, we run into a problem over and over again. There are only 2 times when you identify someone by race. The first time is when the issue is about race. So much of what we talked about already is about that. And the person being black or white or Asian or Native American or Latino is the important thing. Whether their skin is light brown or dark brown, less important. We see this all of the time in police identifications. I would ask you that if I told you that the person I'm describing is an African American, 5'7", 170 pounds, 37 years old, wearing a t-shirt and shorts, You tell me what kind of nose to draw on this picture. You tell me what kind of ears to put in the picture. You tell me what kind of hair I should draw. What do the lips of a black person look like? If he's Hispanic, is he Hispanic as in Mexican American? Is he Hispanic as in Puerto Rican, Cuban? What does a Hispanic eye look like? Because I've got to draw it. That is the problem in our identifications. When you are trying to help me to see someone, tell me what they look like. My skin is caramel brown, honey brown, some people have called it. I like that better. I have dark eyebrows. I have hair invaded by the gray of my children's upbringing. I have a mustache. My left ear is a little bigger than, oh, the right. I'm not sure which it is anymore. But one of my ears sticks out a little bit more than the other one. That's how I look. And if I suddenly started worshiping Allah, or if I suddenly started hablar en español, I still have honey brown skin. Used to be dark hair. It was lovely. You should have seen it. Dark eyebrows, a mustache. I wear glasses. That's how I look. When do I identify? Only when it's about race and ethnicity. Only when that's the point of the story. 3 questions. What are you afraid of? I feel like the guy in Texas. What was my second one again? What? Rick. What are you afraid of? What do you mean? When do you identify? Thank you.